Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Recently on this channel we took a deep dive look at Street Fighter 2's wrestling relative, known as Saturday Night Slam Masters, and followed the video up with a look at the game's sequel, known as Ring of Destruction. Due to popular demand for more classic wrestling game content, I would also cover the first WWF arcade game, known as Superstars. WWF Superstars is significant as not only is it the first arcade game using the WWF license, but it was also the first WWF game developed in Japan. This fantastic little 1989 game was developed and published by Technos Japan, and even directed by Yoshihisa Kishimoto, meaning that the same group made this game who had previously created both Renegade and Double Dragon. Not to mention some great little non-WWF wrestling games before this too. You could say that Technos Japan had a wrestling and combat game pedigree. In today's video we are going to look at Technos Japan's sequel to this game, which is simply known as WWF Wrestlefest, a title many gamers still fondly remember as simply the most fun wrestling game that they have ever experienced. Within this content we are going to take an in-depth look at what made this one so special and what Technos did to build on an already superb WWF Superstars game. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of WWF Wrestlefest, the greatest WWF arcade game. Yeah! 2 years removed from the release of WWF Superstars, the Technos game that focused on American tag team wrestling, it is now 1991. Whilst the previous game seems to have been developed during the era of the Mega Powers and Mega Bucks tag teams, a lot has changed in WWF since. To summarise what I am talking about, as covered in the last video on this channel, the Mega Powers would explode, leading to the members of the tag team facing off against each other at WrestleMania 5, with Hulk Hogan coming out on top. Post the release of WWF Superstars and moving into 1990, the Ultimate Warrior's star power had risen to such a level that he would face off against Hulk Hogan that year, in the first ever WrestleMania main event where two popular goodies faced off with one another, with the Warrior walking out of that show with all the gold around his waist. Whilst all was looking rosy in the world of professional wrestling, away from the ring not all was as well. In August of 1990, a war was waged between coalition forces from 35 nations against Iraq in response to Iraq's invasion and annexation of Kuwait, arising from oil pricing and production disputes. Iraq's invasion of Kuwait was met with international condemnation and brought immediate economic sanctions against Iraq by members of the United Nations Security Council. Together, UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and American President George H.W. Bush deployed forces into Saudi Arabia and urged other countries to send their own forces to the scene. The call was heard and 33 other nations joined the conflict, resulting in the largest military alliance since World War II being formed. During this conflict in the Middle East, wrestling would tick along as normal, however influence would be taken from these greater events in their televised storylines, when Sergeant Slaughter won the WWF Championship. Traditionally, the former G.I. Joe star had always been portrayed as a patriotic hero, but in order to stay in line with current affairs, a controversial storyline was concocted, depicting Sergeant Slaughter as a villain and Iraqi sympathiser. Basically, after a 5-year absence from the company working as a spokesman for G.I. Joe toys introducing new vehicles and figures, Slaughter returned to WWF, announcing that he had turned his back on his country and had become an Iraqi sympathiser and was now a follower of Saddam Hussein. He also revealed an alliance with an Iraqi military leader known as General Adnan. He would defeat the Ultimate Warrior for the championship at the Royal Rumble of 1991. A main event was soon set for Hulk Hogan to face off against Slaughter at WrestleMania 7, with Hogan constantly citing the ongoing real-life war within this feud. On one episode of WWF Primetime Wrestling, Hogan even stated that Iraq would surrender in the war the very moment he defeated Slaughter at WrestleMania 7. However, the first Gulf War ended nearly a month before WrestleMania 7 took place, which meant that Hogan and Slaughter were still fighting over the issue whilst the rest of the world had already agreed to a ceasefire. Ultimately, Hogan would win the WrestleMania title match, but the two wrestlers would feud for many months after, giving fans no opportunity for escapism away from horrible real life issues, like bloody war. Whilst WWF programming may have not been at its creative peak that year, WWF games on the other hand were a completely different kettle of fish, and Japanese company Technos once again managed to deliver an absolutely excellent arcade experience that built on the company's previous work. This 1991 game features beautiful enhanced graphics over what could be found back in 1989, which is paired with a larger roster of characters to choose from and better sound too. There are even new play modes included in the game as well. The two play modes within this game include Saturday Night Main Event mode, which consists of tag team wrestling, which takes you through a series of matches en route to the WWF Tag Team Championships, just like in Superstars before it, which we shall discuss in more detail in a moment. And further to this, we also have an impressive Royal Rumble mode, which we shall also talk about more on soon. So overall, the game is just plain bigger and better than its predecessor, which is reflected by the game's roster as well. WWF Superstars included a playable selection of 6 wrestlers, with the Megabucks, Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase being boss characters, bringing the roster up to 8. From the get-go, WWF Wrestlefest offers players the choice of 10 different characters to play as. Hulk Hogan, The Ultimate Warrior, Ted DiBiase and the Big Boss Man all make returns, with the rest of the roster in the game making their Technos debuts. In terms of characters absent in WrestleFest who appeared in Superstars previously, the Honky Tonk Man left the WWF in January of 1991, after wrapping his WWF run with a stint as a villain colour commentator. Andre the Giant had more or less retired from professional wrestling by the point of this game's release, sadly dying of congestive heart failure in January of 1993. Randy Savage at the time was storyline retired after losing a career-ending match to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania, so as a result was restricted to commentary too, which explains his absence from the game. The only wrestler cut from the roster who was active during the time of WrestleFest's release was Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who I am going to imagine was not included in the game due to not doing much throughout mid-1991. It is of note though that at the beginning of the year he faced Slaughter for the WWF Championship and helped Slaughter see the light at the end of the year when they formed a WWF tag team, so he still made an impact in wrestling that year. In terms of new characters for WrestleFest, we of course have Sergeant Slaughter, who we have probably talked enough about already. We have Jake the Snake Roberts, who was hot on a successful feud with Rick Martel. We have Earthquake, whose career had peaked in 1990 whilst feuding with Hogan. But the fact that Earthquake had a successful run as a sumo competitor in Japan further justifies why he was a great choice for this game. The game also includes Mr. Perfect, a gentleman who had held the Intercontinental Championship throughout a large chunk of 1990 and 1991. Out of the playable characters, the final 2 are actual members of a tag team, which makes a lot of bloody sense considering that tag team competition is such a large part of this game. Demolition are 3 times WWF Tag Team Champions, and still to this day hold the record for most combined days as reigning champions. In Saturday Night Main Event mode, the player or players select 2 of these wrestlers, and even get to witness their entrances from a different camera angle to the rest of the gameplay, representing a greater illusion of TV than Superstars prior. A ring announcer even announces the wrestlers competing in matches with real voice samples as well. Action itself, whilst in the ring, has a lot of similarities to Superstars, but there are key differences and improvements to note. For example, if wrestlers leave the ring in this one, action is presented from a different camera angle, and there are weapons outside that can be utilised, including the ring steps themselves. Opponents can now even harshly be whipped into the barricade to do extra damage. There are all sorts of new layers here. New wrestlers of course also means that there is a huge selection of new moves to both see and execute, adding to what can be experienced. In terms of aesthetics, you may notice that sprites are bigger, bolder and feature many more animation frames than the previous game, but still maintain their fantastic cartoony look, which makes it overall feel like you are wrestling by controlling old school WWF Hasbro figures. I love this game's artistic approach. Speaking of the art in this game, the arenas vary, depicting various different rings from different WWF shows, and the crowds are depicted looking lively and energetic in the background, adding to the feeling of energy within this game. In fact, they look great throughout, from the entrances where they appear both sides of the wrestlers, to when combatants brawl on the outside and fans appear even in the foreground of the screen. It all looks freaking awesome. Speaking of brawling on the outside, this is not always possible though, as the game includes cage matches mid-playthrough to further mix up the action. These special matches include the Big Blue Cage, which was used at various WWF events back in the day, adding to the level of nostalgia this game can deliver to players in 2020. Since all matches are tag team matches players in the main play mode, new combat mechanics have been placed in WrestleFest to further improve tag team gaming. For example, this game places a lot of emphasis on double team moves, and more importantly, extra layers of strategy have been added to tag team gameplay. For example, if a wrestler has been on the apron for a certain length of time, they will power up, temporarily giving them the ability to win all grapples and inflict more damage than usual too, all of which are nice touches. Something I have not mentioned yet is the boss characters included in the game. Saturday Night Main Event mode focuses around a campaign to defeat the Legion of Doom, Hawk and Animal for their tag team titles. After winning each match in this game, a screen even flashes up revealing how many more matches you need to win in order to face off against them. There is even a Mean Gene Okerlund interview with them prior to the big contest against these bad boys. The Legion of Doom, aka the Road Warriors, earned the role of being the final bosses in a tag team wrestling game due to the fact that they had recently entered the WWF and won their tag team championship, but prior to that had been tag team champions for a number of other promotions too. They were the most prolific tag team in the world at the time, becoming the only team to win world tag titles in 3 of the top promotions of the 1980s. After defeating these hard-as-nails champions, Mean Gene will report your win on WWF television, before players have to defend their championships against every team in the game once more. The closing scenes of the game shows off every roster member included in this beautiful little masterpiece before the credits finally roll. Now, it is also important to remember that we have only just covered one play mode so far, as this game presents a Royal Rumble mode for gamers too. While Superstars arcade cabinets were produced for 2-player action, WrestleFest on the other hand allowed 4 gamers to play this game simultaneously, and Royal Rumble mode is perfect for this feature. The gameplay in this mode functions slightly different to an actual Royal Rumble, in that at the start of one of these matches, 6 wrestlers all start out brawling in the ring simultaneously. Elimination can be achieved by pinning wrestlers throughout this contest, but new competitors continue to enter the match and replace them as the action progresses. Victory in this mode is only achieved if you are the only remaining wrestler who has not been pinned after every character in the game has entered the fray and has been defeated. There is a fantastic amount of action in this play mode from a game from 1991, and it doesn't really feature any slowdown either, which is a fantastic feat when you consider how long ago 1991 actually was. This game is so old it debuted the same year as Street Fighter 2. And with the amount of sprite action going on, I couldn't even imagine the PS1 of being capable of running this game years later. So it is not surprising that this one remained an arcade exclusive, regardless of LJN holding the license for wrestling games in the home. Surely only the Neo Geo would have been capable of hosting a game this advanced at home, and that cartridge purchases would have been a fortune anyway. So not ideal for a game that seems to be primarily aimed at the WWF's young audience. It's crazy how advanced this WWF game actually really was, so it's not surprising at all why so many people have great memories of this game and why it is now so beloved so many years later. It's not just a fantastic wrestling game, it's bloody fantastic when you compare it to any game. It was far ahead of its time. Freaking wow, this game offers everything a WWF fan could have possibly wanted. Past this point, the future would present plenty more great wrestling games developed in Japan, but the next WWF arcade game to exist would instead be developed in America. So let me know in the comment section if you are keen for me to cover that one. But in terms of the WrestleFest license, THQ would release an iOS game under the same name in 2012, which functions as a pseudo remake featuring a new roster of characters. Close to the source material's mechanics, Retrosoft Studios are developing a game known as Retromania, which will feature wrestlers from various independent wrestling promotions. Retrosoft even went as far as to acquire the rights to use characters from Mapmania, a previous wrestling game developed by Technos Japan, so the project is shaping up well so far. So the Wrestlefest story still has another chapter soon to unfold. WWF Wrestlefest itself though is a game many people consider the greatest WWF game of all time, and it is not difficult at all to see why. Let me know down below what is your favourite WWF/WWE game, as I would be curious to hear your personal thoughts on the matter. If you're new here, don't forget to like my video, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, you know, all the usual stuff. I'd just like to add it is only possible for myself to work on videos like this full time, in part thanks to the bodacious people who back this channel over on Patreon. I have time to make in-depth videos like this due to their generous support. You can gain early access to all my videos, watch my exclusive vlogs, join my Discord and much more for as little as just $1 or more a month. Huge thank yous and shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, A Murder of Crows, Heyo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Razmik, Doug Perkins, Ryan Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Manth, Camber Rambo 82, Aswell Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Dropkin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Prince Osana, Carlos Domingos, SpongeMac B, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Instant Gratification, Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Posty XL, Michael Hall, Bubba Kitty, Ron Stubb, Busty Sinclair, Langston Miller, Noob, Casey Wright, Zai, Brian Barry, Sir Lagney, Chris Margarine, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Vlamint, Renee Sarai, H. Al Sarai, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, Punky Dudester, Adrian Hannington, Bernard N.G., Marco Soto, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Jazzy Tay, Crazy Yell, Master Jinx, Hans Christian, Time Lord Soundwave, Dan Van Dam, Adam Casting, Gregory Smoragiewicz, Rick 67, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Bull, Angry Little SOB, Mike Bruno, Arnis Reinsbergs, Chris Fisk, Ivan M, Paul Elliott, Me Machine Dean, Antonio Rodriguez, Dan Barlow Jr., Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, Retroverse.com, Since Spaces, Andrew Bazansky. Thank you all of you so much. Yeah.